Welcome back to part 2 of our video lecture on Chapter 3. I left off with this cartoon that kind of sets the stage for the next big topic, which is privacy. In addition to privacy, which is by far the number one ethical issue with regard to information systems for our generation, privacy concerns are absolutely number one. There are three others, however: accuracy, property, and accessibility. So under privacy, an example would be I tend to kind of go to healthcare for some of these healthcare information for some of these examples. That your privacy is kind of balanced with society's need to know. So, for example, if you have an infectious disease, that's probably private health information. At the same time, it's required to report this information to the CDC in Atlanta, the Center for Disease Control, because there's potentially an impact to society at large in terms of spreading a disease. So we have to balance privacy with need to know. Accuracy, if you've ever gone to the doctor and your healthcare record is wrong. This has happened to me really the last 5 or 6 times I've been to the doctor, either for myself or for a family member, where something in the chart is wrong, and you wonder how did this get in there and who's responsible. Number 3, property issues. Who owns information? So if information is the really the most valuable commodity in the 21st century, figuring out who owns it is an important issue, and not just legal but ethical. And finally, accessibility. Who can access your personal healthcare information? Who can access your grades, for example? Your grades are are protected private information, and really only you have access to that. Just one example of it. There's an information technology angle to these ethical issues with regard to information. The first is data collection, how data is collected. The second is data accuracy. The third is data copying, and the fourth is data confidentiality. And these more or less line up with the 4 ethical issues that we just talked about: data collection, privacy, accuracy. Data is so ridiculously easy to copy, of course this becomes a huge property issue. And then confidentiality versus accessibility. I do have 2 ethics related stories I want to share from my own work history. However, I'm not going to do that in a video that's going to be published on YouTube. I'd rather tell you these stories face to face, so let's save these. Another ethical issue that the book doesn't emphasize probably enough, that I would encourage you to be sensitive to, which is this idea of IT and automation. And this is really the dark side of IT in this sense. Whenever you talk about business process management and improvement, a lot of making a business process more efficient is automating it, speeding it up, which typically means replacing people. At least that's the perception that people have. A lot of times it's true. It's not always true. And typically the story is going to be, well, if we don't need that particular job anymore, we'll move that employee into another role within the organization. We're not just going to fire them. However, this also happens where if you completely automate a process, there might be an entire category of people who are no longer needed. For example, the transcription of medical records. If doctors are keying in their own information into an electronic database, they don't need transcriptionists who are listening to their dictaphone messages anymore. So that's an entire career that kind of gets eliminated. So if you're going to be working in IT, I would ask you to be sensitive to this perception. If you're going to be in a department other than IT, don't think the worst of IT. We're not trying to get rid of jobs. We're just trying to make the business better, faster, cheaper. And we all have to kind of work together to figure out how to not let it just automatically lead to job elimination, because it is an ethical, social issue. A related issue to job elimination is offshoring, and particularly within IT, this has become very popular, mostly for cost savings issues, because it's cheaper to outsource your data center to another country, such as India, such as Brazil, such as the Netherlands, such as Ireland. It's a lot cheaper to set up a call center there. It's a lot cheaper to hire programmers in other countries than it is in the U.S. So the question comes up, does a business have any social obligation or ethical obligation to the local community? And, if you're a shareholder, you might say yes, you might say no. But again, this is an ethical consideration this is another one it's absolutely legal. There's no law barring you from outsourcing and offshoring part of your business to another country. But there are ethical considerations that are very real. Another one that I want to make sure you're comfortable with this phrase, again, the book doesn't dwell on it very much at all, but it's this idea of digital divide. I've done some research myself into this area, but the core concept is you have a problem with justice anytime you have haves and have-nots. So in this map of the world, you can see where the U.S. obviously has access to a lot of broadband internet access, and certainly most of Europe. Not everyone in South America, not everybody in Asia. Most of Africa, not so much access to broadband technology. And so you might not see this as an ethical issue initially, but what if that means you have limited access to goods and services, you have more limited access to government services, you have more limited access to health care, you have less access to information. There's an argument to be made that access to information means a higher quality of life. Now, I don't want you to think that this is just an issue between countries, because this is also an issue within the U.S. If I pull up a map of the U.S., you would and kind of broadband penetration, you'd see that all along the East Coast there's broadband access, and all along the West Coast, and isolated metropolitan cities in the Midwest, such as St. Louis, have wonderful broadband access. But drive out in the middle of Missouri, drive out in the middle of Kansas, in the middle of Nebraska, in the middle of Wyoming, where you don't have access to broadband. Is that an ethical issue or a technology issue? My own opinion, well, and based on some evidence, is that it really should be a government issue, because not having the same access to the same level of services is a social justice issue, and that's why I think government should subsidize installation of fiber and whatnot throughout communities where it's not economically feasible, but there's an ethical argument to be made. Again, I'm giving you an opinion, and a lot of people have opinions, but if you grew up in an area where your parents either had dial-up or just satellite access, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And you don't have to drive very far into Illinois to get to an area where that's the case. Another ethical issue with regard to information technology that affects you directly is, what if your employer, where you're interviewing, asks you to turn over your Facebook password before they'll hire you? Is that ethical? In some states, it's legal. Now, the good news is, if I switch over here, Illinois did pass a law, this is actually back in 2012, to make it illegal for employers to ask for logins. What should surprise you is this is just in Illinois, and you might not necessarily be working in Illinois. You might be working in Missouri, you might be working in a completely different state, you might be working in another country. So these privacy laws are very specific to regions, and it's going to differ from state to state, from country to country. That's what makes this such a hairy issue. Well, in order to make ethical decisions, we said you need to have you need to abide by your company's code of conduct or ethical conduct document. Sometimes they'll call this an ethical use policy, sometimes it's in addition to a code of conduct, but it specifically tells you how you're allowed to use company property, such as computers and internet access and email and such. If you look at SIUE's webpage, we have a use statement. We call it responsible use, that shows you what's acceptable for you to do with SIUE-owned computers in the network. And here's violations of privacy. You'll see our 3 tenets in here of accountability and such. Posting obscene, pornographic, sexually explicit, or offensive material. Posting or sending material that is contrary to the mission or values of the university. That can get a little subjective. Intentional or negligent distribution of computer viruses. Does that mean that erroneously clicking on a phishing scam link is going to get you kicked out? Well, probably not, but maybe. And especially if you're working for an organization that puts in their acceptable use that anybody caught clicking on a link that they're not supposed to, that it puts their company's network at risk, is going to get fired. Well, that's a good thing to know, isn't it? Every organization is going to have a different responsible use document, and it's important to read this when you first sign on with the company to know what you can do and what you can't do. Otherwise, you're going to have a very uncomfortable conversation with the HR department at some point if you're not aware of your company's policies. From my own experience, it's just a good idea to don't flame people in the workplace. If you're about to send an angry email, just kind of sleep on it, just wait a while, because there are no backsies. You can't take back a negative email, something you wouldn't want your parents to read or your boss to read, anything like that. A lot of companies are very explicit that a work computer can only be used for business and never, never, never for anything personal. Not booking plane tickets, not shopping on Amazon, not checking personal email. And then other companies are okay with this sort of thing, but you need to find that out. Forwarding jokes at work, don't do it. I don't care if you think it's freaking hysterical. Don't do it. Not everybody shares your sense of humor, and your chance of offending somebody and potentially getting into trouble over it. You'd hate to lose your job over forwarding an inappropriate joke. Certainly falsifying an expense report. And I've seen lots of people lose their job over, doing that. Or falsifying an invoice or a PO. Don't do it. So basically just treating your work computer as work. Everybody's got a home computer now. You use your home computer for home stuff. Just keep it separate. And really, keeping things separate is the best way to maintain privacy. So the definition of privacy for our purposes, the right to be left alone, to be free of unreasonable personal intrusions. Information privacy, by extension, is the right to determine when and to what extent information about yourself can be gathered and or communicated to others. Privacy laws in the U.S. are very specific, that you do not have an absolute right to privacy. You have a right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but not privacy. Privacy has to be balanced against the needs of society. I gave you the example of disease control is only one example. Showing your tax returns if you're a politician might be another. And in general, in the U.S., the public's right to know supersedes the individual's right to privacy. That might sound tough, and I'm sorry if this is news to you, but privacy laws in the U.S. are designed to protect the interests of corporations, not individuals, not consumers. The reverse is true in Europe. In the European Union, they have much stricter privacy laws than we do, and they're geared towards protecting the privacy of consumers, not corporations. It's important to know this. Privacy laws from country to country to country really differ, and if you're going to do business in that country, you have to abide by that country's laws. I ran into this time and time again. For example, in Germany, I wanted to install remote control software on PCs in Germany so that my help desk folks could remote console in and help German employees for my company who were in Germany, because I don't have the budget to fly people back and forth to Germany to fix computers. So being able to remote in was a critical aspect of the job, and that was actually a violation of German law to install that software. So we had to come up with another workaround basically involved getting the employee's permission ahead of time and they had to invite the person in to take control of their computer. You couldn't just do it any time you wanted to. But that took a lot of work with legal to figure out what the right solution was. Another was, and that was with Corning. With Lowe's, we had all kinds of issues going to, when we first opened stores in Canada, specifically in Toronto was the first store. Canada has very different laws around employee records. So, for example, employee records of Canadian citizens have to be stored on servers that are physically located in Canada. All of Lowe's servers are in their very secret data center, which is in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It's not that secret, but all of its servers are in North Carolina, not in Canada. So we ended up having to set up a small data center with a cluster of servers in Canada just to house employee files for Canadian Lowe's employees. That was a pain in the butt, but that's just one simple example of how this comes up. There's lots of legislation to protect privacy, and it differs from country to country, and this is why I say this is the number one kind of ethical issue of our time. Two biggies I'd like you to know about. One is HIPAA, which has to do with protecting healthcare records, and the other is FERPA. I'm always stunned that students have no idea what FERPA is, but it's the federal regulation that protects you and your privacy and your grades. It's the regulation that prevents your parents from accessing your grades. If your mom, if your dad calls me up and says, Dr. Jacks, I'd like to know how Johnny's doing in your class. I am sorry, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Smith, I can't reveal that information because that's confidential information that's protected by FERPA. You'll have to check with your son or daughter to get access to that information. Only you can release that access about your grades. That's why your transcript is protected information, and you have to give your permission to release it. You may notice that when you install software, there's a license agreement that has a privacy section. And if you don't read it carefully, you're either opting into their privacy, opting in or opting out. And it's important to know the difference because consumers tend to prefer an opt-in model. They don't like the opt-out model. Opt-out means we assume you're okay with it, and just by clicking next or continue, you're agreeing, as opposed to opt-in, where I get to consciously decide to opt in to your agreement. So opt-in versus opt-out is an important distinction to understand.